Good morning, almost afternoon. It's good to be here, and we're going to have a great discussion. We've already been talking together over the last hour or so, and I think everyone on this panel is going to have some great insights for you about the question of education and how education can be used to increase equality in our country. I want to start with just a show of hands. The easiest questions you're going to face today. How many parents do we have here in the audience? Wow. And so how many of your parents have put a student through college or are currently putting a child through college? Okay. And last question, how many of you know that when I say Varsity Blues, I'm referring to something other than the James Van Der Beek movie? Okay. So, in case you haven't been paying attention, there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple weeks about the college admissions process and some of the ways in which that process has been distorted and gamed, and the way in which our system is not necessarily an even playing field for everyone. I wanted to just start with Dr. Campbell. You're the president of a prestigious institution, Spelman College. When we spoke earlier this week, you told me that you thought that the scandal has raised a lot of questions that are important to ask, but at the same time, it's something of a red herring. Why do you say that?
Yeah, it was a terrible set of incidents. It was fraud, deceit, corruption, crime. But in point of fact, the real criminal element in this country is the fact that we have so many high-performing, high-need students who are coming out of high school, who are not even considering college. If they go to college, they get into college, particularly if they're Black, Hispanic, or Native American, their chances of completing their degree lag far behind all other students. And if they do graduate, they typically graduate with more debt and often graduate perhaps having gone in hoping to go into STEM fields or some other technical fields and being dissuaded from that in the course of their college career. And what's even worse about this situation is that we know that by mid-century, our demographics, our so-called underrepresented minority, will be the majority in this country. And what is even worse is that we actually know how to fix this. There are actually places around the country that have succeeded with exactly this population.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about what you're doing at Spelman. Another show of hands. Any Spelman graduates in the audience here?
Oh, yeah.
There'll be a door prize for you.
Yeah.
One of the statistics that's jumped out at me that I know you're very proud of is that Spelman it now produces more African-American women with PhDs in the STEM fields than any institution in the country.
That's right. That's a statistic. Thank you. Thank you.
How are you doing that?
That's a statistic from the National Science Foundation. And what's even more remarkable about that is half the students who come to us are Pell eligible. So it means they come from families that make $40,000 or less. Almost 20% of them are first-generation families. Over 80% of them require financial aid. So this is not a rich group. This is not the group that has the money to hand out to the proctors and all that. This is not that group by any means. The way we do it, and the way there's several other colleges in the country that do it, is that from the moment a student arrives, she is regarded as an asset, having assets, not deficiencies, not being broken, she comes with assets, something to contribute. And everything at the college affirms her identity. We have learning communities so that you want biomedical research, you can join social justice fellows, and these are all adults who help students form these outside of the classroom. In the classroom, we insist that we have teachers who are not just good researchers and famous and they have to love teaching. And they have to love their students. I know that sounds so corny, But you cannot teach, and students cannot learn unless they understand that the person teaching them really wants them to succeed. And the expectations are high. First year students will say at the end, Spelman is hard. And we say, yes, but guess what? You have everybody here to help you get from here to there. And I'm so glad Ebony is here because we forge incredible strategic partnerships with businesses, with other academic units, with hospitals, with institutions abroad, so students can see a path from where they are into the world.
Yeah. Can I
Go
jump
ahead.
in?
Yes, please.
You know, when I saw the agenda and I saw Dr. Campbell was here, I was super excited for a couple of reasons. I mean, this is where we talk about education and industry really meet in a perfect way. So we have this opportunity, which we call this our Spelman 20. Now, in the realm of Spelman, if you understand the scale of this university, right, college is very small. So when you talk about 20 students, 20 young women, 20 young African American women in any one space at one time is significant. And so our ability to take those 20 young women for the past 2 years, bring them to Charlotte, bring them to Bank of America, and it's about them. Bank of America is agnostic in this process. This is about them learning who they are. They're discovering their skills. They're discovering who they want to be. And we're not telling them that you have to be this. You have to come work at the bank or you have to be in technology. But we have a wide swath of students. So whether they're in the STEM field, whether they're in liberal arts, whatever their major is, we don't care. It's really about how do we help equip these young women who, to Dr. Campbell's point, are starting, many of them are Pell eligible, many are first college generation. I myself is first college generation. So how do we take these young women and retool them at the freshman level? So they start with a leg up. And so we appreciate Dr. Campbell and her team for allowing us to create this partnership that, again, if it's an outcome of a hire, that's amazing, but it's really about the young women and the relationship and the education of Spelman students.
Well, and maybe you could just build on that. I mean, for others in the room here, how does B of A think of this sort of talent development as part of its sort of overall business strategy? Why is it worth the investment in your view?
Right. I mean, it's in our fabric. It's who we are. When we think about we're over 200,000 employees, of course we're going to have turnover, but it's really about how do we attach ourselves to universities, to corporate, to community organizations that's really going to build the future of workforce. I mean, that's really what it's about. We have a talent need, and there's a demand that's out there, and so we want to be able to fill that talent gap that's constantly evolving. One of the conversations that we were having backstage is, listen, by the time a student graduates, probably with a STEM degree, they're going to need to be re-equipped in another year, maybe 6 months to 2 years, right? Because it's constantly evolving and changing. And so Bank of America has to be on the cutting edge of that. We have to find innovative partners, innovative solutions. We have to find alternative ways to increase the talent flow into the organization. And so for us, it's a business imperative because we need amazing, innovative talent.
Yeah. I'd like to ask Jake to weigh in, because it seems that what General Assembly does, and some folks in the room may not be totally familiar with what General Assembly is, but what you really are doing is you're providing that glue between educational institutions and employers. Can you just talk about that role that you play, General Assembly plays, and why you saw that as an opportunity?
That's right. So the original thing that we saw as an opportunity was that there was this skills gap, which is another way of just saying there was a supply-demand imbalance, right? And, in the theory of markets, it should be efficient, but the reality is the labor market particularly is so slow-moving that it's basically inefficient. And that there were a huge amount of, let's call them technology-focused jobs that were so new as roles even that there wasn't an abundant supply, and that the curve of demand for those was accelerating rapidly, right? Every company has a digital transformation strategy now, and they're all trying to hire the exact same type of skills at the exact same time everywhere around the world. I call it sort of the I drink your milkshake problem, right? So everybody's battling. And the whole idea is, well, how do we make this not a zero-sum game? How do we make this where we're building instead of buying the talent as employers, so that A, we have a proprietary sort of pipeline of people that are prepared and want to work at my company, and B, that I can count on them being there when our business plan says that we need to have them. And I think so we teach, software engineering, data science, data analytics, UX design, product management, cloud migration, and all these sorts of skills that are so in demand that it's literally like people are altering their growth plans as companies because they don't believe they're going to be able to find enough people to do it. And that's really damaging. Now, what's really cool and I think appropriate for this panel is what we've seen is the minute you adopt as a company a build versus buy mentality, you have all of these options available to you. You can actually create the diverse pipeline that you wish existed in the world. Because once you're building, you can say, we're going to build a cohort of women who are going to just be on the tech team. And it's going to be only women. And it's going to really balance the scales. We've seen companies like Adobe and Disney do this and we sort of help power this, where you can build programs of cohorts where they get trained, mentored, and deployed in a whole new capacity in a way that solves two birds with one stone, right? You're giving opportunity inside your company or outside your company. You can do both. But at the same time, you're also filling seats that your business desperately needs to fill. And part of our job, though, is to connect all the dots inside a company. Because I think we all assume companies are these hyper-rational, efficient things.
We're not?
Right. Exactly, yes. I'm sure as everyone can tell you, merely connecting the dots internally is hard. And so we were talking about this a little bit. The spend of a major bank like Bank of America on talent acquisition as a function is probably in the billions of dollars, like at least $1 billion. We debate. I know you don't want to believe it. Fine. We should have this bet. Let's go get the data.
Let's go get the data.
The point is there's a lot of money spent on that, right? The art is how do you take that money that's already being spent, and I would argue as sort of a way to deal with this supply-demand imbalance, and redirect it from just buying and overbidding more and more for the existing people who have already been advantaged in this field, to building, which creates something much more robust, much more sustainable, and much more aligned with the sort of social and cultural goals that you have as an organization. And this is sort of what I go around sort of evangelizing and helping companies do by building these internal skills academies very focused on these things. And the minute you can connect all those dots from the individual who's looking for a new opportunity, and most individuals, whether outside or inside, are looking for that opportunity, all the way through to the job that needs to exist. And if you can connect all those pieces together, you've created a sustainable pipeline that can also drive huge amounts of sort of diversity and access and sort of on-ramps for people who typically wouldn't have the access to get there.
Right. Well, that's great. And I wanted Rebecca to tell us a little bit about what Imbellus is doing. But it seems that what everyone here is talking about is how do we tap into and identify potential, human potential, student potential. And one of the biggest parts of that is finding a way to accurately assess that potential. And that's what you at Imbellus are doing. Can you just talk about sort of how assessments, the way in which we test students from kindergarten all the way through college, affects the set of issues that we're talking about, how it affects the ability for us to create an even playing field for all students.
Yeah, so I think assessments are not dissimilar from any other incentive that drives the system's behaviors. But we're really used to thinking about what happens after a test. We're used to thinking about, was my SAT score fair? Was it reflective of my true knowledge? Did it get me into the right school? What I think America has greatly underappreciated is the extent to which those tests end up driving exactly what high schools teach, and therefore what middle schools teach, and therefore what elementary and down to pre-K, and you end up, with moms on the Upper East Side shopping for Harvard admitting preschools before their kids are born. And that phenomenon is really I think, to the red herring point of the varsity blues, that's really the tragedy of our system, is it's not last mile test prep that's skewing results. It's 12 years of compounded disadvantage. And to have the privilege of a brain that's ready for last mile prep, for retraining or reskilling, is a privilege. And right now, most of our kids don't have those brains. And there's some rewiring that you can do at the end when someone's 22 or 27. And I'm sure we'd all like to believe that there's more rewiring that can happen there than really seems to be the case. A lot of it starts when kids are really little. And it's not just what's happening at school. It's what's happening at home. It's what did your mom eat when she was pregnant with you. It's did you ever get to travel? Did you do summer camp? And right now, our entire system is stacked against the answer to any of those questions being no. And when I thought about how I wanted to raise the floor for high school education, I came to this line of code of college admissions assessments as really pivotal in shaping those downward forces that end up in turn shaping the entire system. And what I noticed was it's not that the SAT is actually a horrible predictor, although people like to claim it is, or it's not that the SAT and the ACT are terribly biased or unfair. They have their problems, but it's more like they're the only games in town.
Yeah.
And so when you think about a market that has 7,000 members, like the college market, tell me one industry where all 7,000 companies provide the same ROI. There's none. That means that college is a grab bag. If you go to Harvard, your odds are great. If you go to Trinity, your odds are better than if you go to, random university in Florida that's not on the map as somewhere that the elites are targeting getting their kids into. So when you think about that context, the fact that high school is designed to ship kids off to this North Star of college, a varying assortment of colleges, it actually seems really suboptimal, because what it means is a lot of our kids graduate college ready, but not adulthood ready. And that's what I set out to try and change, to create tests that could evaluate the underlying plumbing, the hardware of our brains that you're going to need no matter what software you choose to plug in on top of it, in a way that would in turn shape our system to hopefully give kids in poor districts who right now have no chance of taking 5 AP courses and scoring above a 3 on all 5, a fighting chance at developing a brain that would be ready for adulthood.
So I want to move into talking about changes, reforms, things that can be done to make this system more fair for more students and promote more opportunity and social mobility. But I wanted to get your input too. So let's do one of the polls that I think you've already done a few of these. If everyone wants to take out their phones and open the browser, go to bloombergequality.app. And here's the question that we would like to pose. The question is, what's the best way to promote greater equality in higher education? 1, do away with standardized tests. 2, lottery-style admissions. So you meet a certain criteria, and then it's an open lottery system to decide who gets in. Making college free, tuition free for all students who want to attend.
It's a race.
And 4th, developing alternatives to a traditional 4-year degree.
I love it.
So
Okay.
sort of
Neck
what
and
I
neck.
expected.
Yeah.
And I'd love... I know, yeah, I know. I feel like,
Some
come
last
on, number
minute
4.
folks.
Can I
number 4.
campaign for number 4?
Yeah.
Number 4.
So let's just take the number 3 and number 4. Those seem to be the most popular choices. Dr. Campbell, maybe you can talk about the question of free college, which is something we're hearing a lot about increasingly from people in the political realm. What does that really mean, and what difference would it make if we had a free college system or program?
Well, we already have evidence, certainly at our college at Spelman. For those students who come in who were Millennium Gates scholars, they get a full ride, they get their tuition, room and board, all their fees paid for. Our graduation rate was something like 98%, 97%. So it was very clear. We've had the Millennium Scholars over a long period of time. So we know that to be the case. And any of our other programs where we have taken away the issue of money, you've taken down a huge barrier. But I want to get back to what Rebecca was talking about, and that is assessment. we actually have many ways of measuring talent. We do it all the time. The standardized tests are quick, easy, and standard. That's what makes them usable. But in fact, you can get a group of students together. You can look at the way they collaborate. You can look at their way they work on a long-term project. You can identify their grit, their resilience. There are all kinds of attributes that you can assess, and you can create different kinds of assessments. So the real question is, how should we be identifying talent? And from high school to college, what kind of programmatic interventions can we make to further deepen the preparation before students get to college? And again, we have tons of evidence of how we can succeed using those measures.
Yeah, I mean, and I think on the heels of Dr. Campbell and Rebecca, and I know one of the words you used was really around sustainability, because that's the goal, right? Is that, these kind of short-term programs, and we have a whole history of programs, right, across the U.S. government and others that don't work, right? And so it's really, how do you create this sustainable model that you have now, the apprenticeship model that we are heavily invested in, right? And as we think about how do we, reskill, retool, and redeploy talent, right? So to your point, a part of that is there's an assessment. And we have many partners that we work with, whether it's CareerWise, whether it's, working with, Year Up and other organizations, right, which we're deeply, connected to. But it's how do you create that sustainable model that, if we think about coming out of the 90s and 2000s, the job market was great. You had all these low income, these inflow of low income jobs and folks that were coming through the organizations. Then you had the Great Recession, right? And so the bottom dropped out, right? And so now you have a lot of these individuals that need to now rely on, these programs again to rebuild themselves. So as we are now in a really nice job market, we have to think about what are the products, what are the tools, what are the organizations that can sustain these assessments, that can sustain even through a downturn, right? Because when you talk about economic mobility, that is the key. It's not programmatic, it's sustainability. And when you're talking about who you're partnering with and making sure if it's organizations, like General Assembly, how do we make sure that they have a long shelf life?
And Jake, I do want you to.
I want to get into the.
Well, I also want you to address this issue of alternatives.
Oh, sure. Well, that's where I wanted to go.
Great.
So great. So we're good.
How do we do that? How do we build alternatives?
Well, okay. So I think there's a couple things, and I want to. We need to differentiate between the system we have today and trying to make that system work for everybody as much as we can, versus what system might be better, right? And I think this is one of my board members at GA was Richard Barth, the CEO of KIP, who often said, "Please don't tell my kids that college doesn't matter," right? Because this is the thing that's getting them through the day. You know what I mean? And I think I want to really respect that, right? Now I want to say the same thing, and I think both of these are tuition free for students and alternatives are some ways two sides of the same coin, because it's not actually free college. It's should we as taxpayers pay for everybody to go to free college, make sure everyone has access to college, and probably in the world that we live in today, absolutely. But then I would also argue we need to, and with all due respect, because I have so much respect for Spelman and all of that. Why is college so freaking expensive, right? Why does it cost so much money in the current form?
But we cost half as much.
I believe it. But we have had, for the last 40 years, a sort of runaway train of inflation in the college market that has created this sort of level of inequity to some level. And then on top of it, not to mention, you got to have the savings for the bribes and for everything else on top of that. But why is that? That's because those bribes are meaningful, and why people are so desperate to do it is because it has this illusion of meritocracy, right? And the illusion of meritocracy, but ironically, once you peel back that, and you say, wow, college is a racket, and you see that, wait, maybe it's not as much of a meritocracy as we believe, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the value that is actually being created by all this money being spent? Because if it's not truly a meritocracy, it's just a giant sort of system of extracting a lot of dollars and then dropping people off on the other side of it.
I think what
Yeah.
everyone gets out of it is skimming, right? So different companies have different brand values that command different sectors of the top 10%, the bottom 30%, whatever. Everyone's just in a race to skim the
Yes.
top 1% that they can out of their assigned band.
But this is actually
So
my,
what they get out of it though, and you can't, and you really, we
we have more
really
time?
can't.
I did my job. I got everybody really going.
We really can't make fun of this. Is that in some colleges there's real social mobility.
Yes.
And if you leap 2 quintiles, your family, your community leap with you. And we can go through we can look at the Chetty report. It's
Right.
public. And we can see which of those places are in fact moving.
Yeah, I mean, not only Spelman, but we talked about the system of HBCUs, right? You know, historically black college and universities. I'm a product of HBCU, you know, really from first generation to now creating wealth. I mean, like, it changes generations, right? It changes families. So, you know, the notion that in some ways, to your point, the college is a racket, you know, definitely not going to debate for Bank of America because we love our universities as well as many of our other partners. But we understand the economic mobility that comes out of a 4-year, and also what also can come out of economic mobility of someone who's not in a 4-year, right? So we recognize that there are opportunities for folks who want to go to university and go to 4-year, but we also have a pathway for those who decide they don't want to go into a 4-year institution. There's the place and a
So
home
this
for
is why I
you.
want to differentiate between the system we have versus the system that maybe should be. There is no doubt that social mobility happens in the context of college. You'd be
Right.
crazy to argue that.
Well, it depends on which
But
college.
it does depend on which college, and I think it depends. And if you look at the system overall
Yeah.
versus the really shining but lights of hope and
Right.
and truth in the system, right? Like there is a difference between this. Like if you look at the average system would say that your success in college is primarily determined by who your parents were and how much money they made and which zip code they lived in, right? On average.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say mobility doesn't happen in that context, and I'm not saying we should burn it all to the ground. That's why I sort of differentiated that way. But I do wonder, because just like the standardized test drives the behavior of everything below it, at the end of the day, this system exists partly because it works, and employers are the final destination. They are the final stop on this
Yeah.
train.
There are a couple of perception gaps, though, that I think are what are really uncomfortable for America to grapple with, and they're kind of now in the spotlight, but people aren't calling them out. So one of those perception gaps is, I think there is some degree of a zero-sum game when you think about college admissions. Harvard has a finite number of spots, and that's why people are willing to beg, borrow, and steal to try and get them. And so there's this discomfort that I think particularly liberals, and myself being one of them, have to grapple with, which is like, should my kid have a higher ceiling of what's expected of them because of what they were born into, because they started with more privilege, than someone who was born into a circumstance of lesser privilege? And am I willing to potentially sacrifice my own family line's wealth and increased stature in favor of giving everyone the fair shot that I claim to care about? That's one question. And the second is, do the elite colleges really feel anything?
Just drop the mic, man. Just
Yeah.
This is Rebecca. Yeah.
Actually, we
Wait,
do
can
need
I
to go,
ask
but
one
why
more?
don't you finish your point?
One more. There's two. The second question is, and I think this is part of what has distorted the college market to have the ripple effects that it's had so negatively, do the elite colleges really feel any systemic pressures? And I think, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. You know, Bank of America says, I care about this new thing. Harvard says, great, not on our campus, right? So there's this disconnect between the elite idea of a theoretical liberal arts education that functions so nicely as a 1-2 step. 4 years, $200K to learn for the sake of learning. Then there's law school and business school and med school, and you get $200K again. So it's actually not in the college's best interest to try and dismantle this idea that for 4 years America should be sending kids to learn for the sake of learning. And I have nothing against learning for the sake of learning, except that for a lot of our kids, they need to learn for the sake of living, and we're not giving them a chance.
Here, here.
On that note, we are out of time. But please join me in thanking this wonderful panel.